Thank you very much. I just want to first applaud the two presenters. I consider this a feast of the mind. And thank you very much for serving us such a delicious feast of the mind. Secondly, I want to actually just reinforce what Washira said about who keeps the records. If you look at Article 86 of the Constitution and the electoral rules for parliamentary and governance, it is clear that the duty bearer is the Electoral Commission. And therefore, it is absurd for a court to fail to issue orders for them to provide the necessary documentation and evidence to petitioners. It's allowing the respondent to sit on the evidence and tell you, then prove, now prove. And I'm of the view that electoral disputes should be in the nature of an inquiry, where the court takes the duty to inquire whether the conduct, on behalf of the Republic, because it's on behalf of the people, whether the election was conducted in a proper manner. And the court should never shield the electoral body, because they have a duty. I agree on all the things about standard of proof. The other point I wanted to comment on is, can the court fill in the gaps where the law or the Constitution falls short? And I want to draw your attention to Article 259(3) of our Constitution, which says that interpreting or construing the Constitution, the court shall rely on the principle that the law is always speaking. That, in short, means whenever there is a lacuna, the court can fill in. Not so that the court competes with the legislature, but to prevent absurdity. And I'll tell you one occasion where the court could have done that. In my petition in 2017, gubernatorial elections, the Supreme Court dismissed my petition on the basis that it was late. And they very sweetly observed, an innocent petitioner through no fault of her own. I hadn't gone to court for pity. I had gone for justice. The delay they were talking about was in the courts, so that the court delays you and tells you time is finished. Not to mention they had actually gotten my exhibits stolen in the court, you know. So these are the things that we really must discuss. It is not about the past, it's moving forward. How do we help ourselves? If you can lose evidence in the courts, someone's title to land will get lost and they will lose their case and their real owners. So the implications to our life, not just to politics, is so much that we need to talk about this and wonder whether when we give honor to the courts, the occupants of those positions are thinking it's their personal honor instead of realizing it's for and behalf of Kenyans. Also to remember, the Constitution says that the power to the courts is donated by the people to be exercised strictly in accordance with the Constitution and for the benefit of the people. And that goes for every public officer. Thank you very much. And I will be seeking leave to exit very quietly.
Thank you very much.
Mine is in the form of questions and majorly centering around the issue of timelines that affect how quickly the Supreme Court is supposed to make a decision, and also, mainly that. So the first question is, assuming that the court made a finding that the elections were irregular and illegal, and therefore nullified the elections. But then the petitioners had also made a request that the team that conducted the elections be found to have violated the law. Assuming that that was the case and those requests were granted, what will then happen in view of the timelines? Does the court have the power to say that, to vary the timelines and therefore allow the commission to be reconstituted, and then a new team to handle the repeat elections. And then what happens in that case on the term of the president, of the sitting president? Then still on the timelines, I think you mentioned the issue, that's Sashira, you mentioned the issue of the constitutional questions that arise at the Supreme Court, which has no jurisdiction to pronounce itself on. So,
no, it does, but only on appeal.
On appeal, yes, yeah, but not at the first instance.
Yes, yeah.
So, but you say that these questions need to be legislated at a certain level before they come here. So what happens to this petition, the original petition at the Supreme Court? Does the court have the power to say we shall suspend this hearing until the High Court or the Court of Appeal, the High Court, is able to pronounce itself on this? Then we use that to make the subsequent decision. Then.
Okay, just one more question. You must string, you must about 5.
Okay. So then the other was a question on the technology, but I think.
No, please, since it's on the topic of technology and we haven't had any others, I'll allow it. Please go ahead.
Okay. I think the person who talked about technology sort of addressed it, but I could just mention what the questions were. I think initially technology came in because of the problems we were having. So we thought technology would address those problems and would have a free and fair election. But has technology itself become a problem? And why is technology suddenly a problem? And what can we do about it? I think, Maina, you touched on it a bit. Maybe you have some questions there. But then the other question would be, did we make a mistake with the Supreme Court when we said a presidential petition should go straight to the Supreme Court, which then leaves the petitioners with no recourse for appeal? Thank you.
People may remember before the election, TIFA, like InfoTrack and Ipsos, where I used to work, last polls showed Raila winning by 6 or 7%. So we have kind of a problem of professional reputation as to try to explain that discrepancy, which is one of the reasons, only one that I came today. But I'm trying to write something for The Elephant, which should be uploaded in the next week, to interrogate these things, leaving out the question of any vote theft or anything like that, because we don't have forensic evidence of that. A couple of very quick things. First of all, just for my background information, can anybody tell me, was there a single instance at any of the 40,000+ polling stations where an agent complained that the Form 34A that had been posted there turned out to be different from the results in the 34A from that polling station that were uploaded? I didn't hear of any, but I'm just wondering, was that the case? Because before we get to what's PDF on the website and in the server and so on, we go back to the Court of Appeal decision that those 34A hard copies at the polling stations are final. Second, there was a forum here last week with ELOG. I happened to have a quick conversation with one of the IEBC commissioners who's still there, asking why I've not been able to access the results for any of the other 5 full election results aside from president at the website. He could only say they're not available. There was no explanation as to why it's taken so long or when they would be available. I know we've had this issue in the past. And finally, is it unrealistic, naive to look forward to the tribunal, even if we have only 2 commissioners, I think, who haven't resigned, to shed light on some of the questions that have been raised today? And then finally, related to that, is there was a widespread assumption that was revealed in our pre-election surveys that many Kenyans, I wouldn't say how many, but many, expected Raila to win regardless of the vote totals, simply because the system, the deep state, whatever you want to call it, was backing him. And if this assumption was widespread among the population, is it not strange if there was any deliberate messing with the electoral process within IBC or anywhere else, that before the result was announced, by Chebukati. I'm not aware of one person who came forward and was expressing or giving evidence about the rigging process or whatever it was that was ongoing. I mean, we've heard plenty of evidence and reports of weaknesses within IBC and so on. We know as far as the KPMG was very late to be given that contract. It wasn't their fault because of arguments about procurement, whether that was corruption or whether there were attempts to kind of preordain what the results of that audit of the register would show. I don't know, but it just seems strange in a country where people were expecting that the government in place at the time would control the outcome, that if any efforts were being made before the election day to control the result in favor of the deputy president, who was not the favored candidate of the system, that nobody came forward and said, you know, Kupiga Firimbi. So I just find that a bit of a disconnect. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Tom Wolf, and thanks for reminding us that while we're dwelling on the handling of the presidential election petition, we have not seen the results of the other positions, which from the other levels below president, which is absolutely unacceptable. Yeah. This again goes to the management of information. Please, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Maina and Tino and Kigoro for the comments. But this presentation for me is mind-blowing. Mind-blowing because, for me, first of all, it's not even a question of the two protagonists. The issue is, what system do we have? What do we stand for and what do we believe in as a people? I recall some time back, some government officials, as usual, went to Singapore to benchmark. I always wonder why they don't do what they see. And one of them tells me, they asked, so where is your EACC? And they couldn't understand what they were asking. I mean, how do you deal with corruption? Where is your Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission? And they said, we don't have one. Why would you have one? But you see, what we have done as a country, because ideally, by the way, EACC should be, the function should be run by the police, but we take that out and create an organ, then strip it out of its power. But also, more significantly as the people, we then reinforce the culture of not having values that even will then determine what even a judge does in the Supreme Court. All right? So that it is okay to run an election like this and still come out a hero. As I'm sitting here asking, is there a way, Maina, of doing a fundamental audit? So if these people actually transgress the Constitution the way they transgressed, then they should never hold another constitutional office in this country. I think we've gotten to a point where we need to drill. We went beyond, we were in the streets pushing out more. But now we need to start drilling and locking down those finer details so that we are able to continue operating at a level where a sense of shame is knocked back into the society. I think for too long we focused on the presidency. For me, I've said it severally, Parliament is an enemy of the people. Look at what they are doing now. Term limits they want to remove. I don't know which representative in those constituencies sent those guys to remove those things. Others are saying because we did not go and see. And by the way, I'm not on any side. I'm just looking at what it means to be in this country. Because Winnie did not go to Parliament. Now she must be called in front of Parliament. In a country that is really reeling with so many problems. Now we want to have a conversation with Winnie. Why she shouldn't go to Parliament. And we are calling that a representative of people. Another question quickly. 14 days. Should we move it to 3 months? But have constitutional frameworks that ensure that within those 3 months, you're not appointing everybody everywhere. But within those 3 months, we slowly resolve this. I mean, I quickly realized, I asked one of the ministers, just after the election happened and before the new cabinet came in. So I asked him, so how have your cabinet meetings been under Ruto? And he told me, nothing much has changed. All that happened is, Uhuru moved, Ruto sat there. And since he used to be part of this cabinet, we just continued. Okay, there's some distrust, but we apologized. And we continued. which means it's not a crisis. We don't have to kill each other. I don't think we have to rush this thing in 14 days so that we are able to resolve this. So is it time we also put a torchlight on Parliament as the people? Because this is donated power. And by extension, even the judiciary. And at several levels. I mean, if you talk to the average Kenyan today, going to the judiciary for anything is harrowing, let alone the petition. Do we need to talk about this? Then finally, how do we talk to the people's side of change? I think it is high time we had this critical conversation, which I also believe is a function of what any government or any people should be doing to educate ourselves on this issue of the Constitution. Is it okay, for example, to have a system that is riddled with bribery from day one until the day we vote, and then we run to the High Court for decisions, right? I filed a court with Super Churchill, I don't know whether he's here, a matter, on the question of eligibility, Chapter 6 issues. We filed it in the High Court, we even took it to the Supreme Court. They were both kicked out. In fact, the judge in the High Court told us to come after the election, and we were asking, are the 420-something people eligible to run for office? So that even the judges do not want to engage. And let me tell you something finally, my friends. Peace, because Kenyans like saying peace, 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 and I like that banner, is not the absence of violence, but the presence of justice. The minute we think there is not justice, there will be violence. Today people are beating cops. The other day I was talking to cops and I told them, we continue like this, we will beat you. Why will we beat you? Because we've donated, this power to you, not for you to oppress us and stop every car. In fact, for me, I don't know whether you're like you. Every time I see a cop on the road, I don't think he's doing anything good. I think it's a toll station. I don't know whether you guys feel like that. Yeah. Which is very sad. We tell our children, police.
Thank you. We had Winnie next.
I have a question on technology, and this regards to matters access, because it has become a very recurrent issue. I think in the past 2 elections, and we seem not to be getting a solution to it. And what technically happens then is that, we deny justice from a technology lenses. So the question is, what safeguards should we put in place to ensure that we get access when we want, and not just access, but meaningful access to the system, and to what extent? What kind of orders should we be seeking? And do we also have a judiciary that is technologically, they understand these things? Because when we see the logs that James was showing us, if they did not understand that was created in August, the logs we had pulled out, then I don't know how to help them, because they should be able to understand these things. Secondly, I think, and lastly, is the issue of truth-telling. How do we tell this story that we've had here today, which is very, very important? How do we tell it to the common wananchi in a manner that they understand? Because for them, beyond the form that was submitted from their polling station, so long as they see it on the portal, they're fine. They really need to understand the elections in this country is not about transmitting just the form. It's also what happens behind the scene before and after. I have an experience I want to share. I was an observer in the just concluded election, and I chose purposefully to go to the prisons. So we went to review and lastly to committee. And there was something that happened that left me with many questions. So we went there when they had completed the voting process, so they were just waiting for the closing until they could count. But what happened then is the results, the number of papers that issued the votes, because then they vote only for the presidential, could not tally with what was in the Kim's kit, and they did not have a solution. We waited there for hours and hours, and it seems, they could not resolve. I tried to follow up on the results from that polling station on the portal. It is not there. And no one asks questions about what happens to prisons votes. We want to just, nobody asks. And given that it was a closely contested race, those numbers can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Winnie. We now come to the gentleman here before going to Caroline.
And Dr. Tieno for your presentation, and also Nicole for giving that history. It's good, it informs our discussion. So I'm thinking on the question of timelines, the constitutional timelines, and ask ourselves, we need to revisit Article 40 that limits the time for the Supreme Court to determine this. Is it working for us? And bearing in mind that these courts are creatures of the Constitution, and we know under Article 1, the question of the supremacy of the Constitution. So it is an area that we need to really to spend our energies and think, is this timeline of 14 days working for us? Second question, second area is, I'm a keen observer of the processes of governance in this country. And I was asking myself, if at all the Supreme Court really ruled the other way, and it demands the petitioners placed that they had no trust with the Commission. A situation, for the first time, we are staring at a situation, a likelihood, a possibility, or having two presidential election results for Tinway and TB, saying this one is very scary for the nation. And never again, I will not really want to see this as a peace advocate. I, for one, I really feel as a nation, we really wasted our time, 2017, 2022, in pursuing electoral justice. For the first time, is it in Africa, that we had a Supreme Court that had nullified an election, and we came out very seriously that the question of electoral justice is that it has become elusive. How do we clinch this? But instead of pursuing this, we came up with a cacophony of other issues that were not priority issues. And we went to sleep. Literally, we went to sleep. Then 2022 came, and it's like you are found when our pants are down. I think, for me, I cannot forgive myself that even I never said anything strongly to that even.
To verify the findings and implementation of findings. Is this a useless clause considering the parliamentary calendar around that period? How do we fix this issue of cleaning the voter register? When he talks about the findings, he's talking about the findings of the audit report. And we all know that we have not yet seen the audit report produced by KPMG for the IEBC this year. All we've seen is a sort of PowerPoint presentation with responses from the IEBC. So is that a useless clause? I suppose that goes to you, Ashira. Okay, I think we can now come back to the panelists to respond. Thank you. Yeah, you.
I don't want to be misunderstood. I did not say that the Supreme Court should stop its hearing and refer the question to the High Court. I said there were 4 options that were available. That's one of them. One other option was narrow the interpretation of Section 138 3C and 10. Narrow the interpretation and make it non-binding on other courts. I don't agree with the High Court's conclusion that Section 138, 3C and 10 relate to the presidential election. Those provisions relate to how the IEBC makes decisions. And IEBC makes very many decisions, not just on the presidential election. It makes decisions on many other aspects of the election. It makes decisions on procurement. That clause relates to how IEBC makes decisions. It includes amongst those decisions, the decision of the presidential election. So that is not a question on which the Supreme Court has exclusive jurisdiction. Because how the IEBC makes, and in fact, the 2 cases, the IBBI case and the previous case I was referring to, already consider Section 138 3C. And 10. So it is not correct for the High Court to take that position. However, part of the reason why I was saying the options available to the court is that if the court read into the Constitution that the timelines were subject to any constitutional issues that arose, then it would have to be prepared to delay the resolution of the case so that the case can be litigated at High Court, appeal, and finally comes to the Supreme Court itself. It would have to accept that process. The point is, there were other options other than this broad binding interpretation of that particular clause of the Constitution. Now, there are some questions I received in written form. One of them was from Kwamchati, that Gedu showed the court a purported original Form 34A, which was impugned by Soweto as being problematic. And the question Kwamchati was asking is, where did he get an original if all the material was in the custody of the court? That's an interesting question. I don't venture an answer for it. But the more interesting issue is, though ballot boxes, I believe, are supposed to be under the custody of the ballot boxes that are supposed to be in the custody of the court. I believe that's a correct position. I think we need to make a distinction between information and ballot boxes. I think the custody of the information is still with the IEBC. The particular ballot boxes relating to the presidential election might be in court. And I think the responsibility of IEBC as custodian never really changes in terms of their responsibility to facilitate the person who is about to litigate any issue coming before the court. Now, let me just then go back systematically to the questions that were asked. When George was speaking, it struck me that there is a distinction that has caused a great deal of confusion in Kenya relating to independent institutions. I think because we haven't clarified what it is we want from independent institutions, we have always designed them badly. Now, there are three different concepts in independent institutions, or in constitutional institutions. There are three different approaches we could take. You can have an independent institution, you can have a partisan institution, and you can have a non-partisan institution which is not necessarily independent. Because I think we assume that if it's non-partisan, it must be independent. It doesn't follow, because you can have an institution in which every party is allowed to appoint its representative. So the party appoints a partisan person, and you end up with 10 partisan people, but the institution itself has a character that is non-partisan. But there is no belief that the institution is non-political. The institution is non-political. It's non-partisan, but it's political, but it's not independent. An independent institution is an institution that both the way how it appoints people and the kind of people it appoints are given institutional and personal. They are personally independent and institutionally autonomous of the various appointing parties. Then you can have a fully partisan body that that is appointed by one party. Say a ruling party appoints all the. We used to have a body like that. The supervisor of elections before in the 80s used to be a person appointed by the ruling party. So you can have a partisan body, a non-partisan body that is not independent, and an independent body that is constituted of professionals. I think when we are designing our institutions, we always are unsure, because we seem to be gravitating to a non-partisan model, but at the same time we want to appoint the non-partisan body through partisan processes, and we also want them to act as an independent body. And they surprise us when they don't. But that's a problem of our own creation. Mother made comments, no response there. The question of timelines. I feel, and not many people agree with me on this because I've made this comment somewhere else, I feel as if this timeline emergency is an emergency of our own making. Because the crucial determinant of the timelines and the crazy timelines we have is when the term of the president ends. So we began with the term of the president, then we built timelines around it. I think we should have begun the other way around. We should have begun, how much time do we need for electoral disputes? Then what you do is you say, the election is held 5 months before the term of the president ends. Yeah? So that then what you have is or 3 months. So then you have, like America, elections on the first Thursday in November, every 4 years. And then you have the day of taking over is in January. So there is basically almost 3 months in which you litigate the dispute. So the term should not be the thing that is holding us hostage. We can decide an electoral date that creates enough headroom for disputes of all manner to be raised, litigated, and finalized. I think our own, it's this, we have this hard target. We have this hard target on, Uhuru is going to be in power and constitutionally. So we get caught up by the debate about the guy who is leaving power, instead of getting caught up in the debate about how do we identify the next president, which is the correct debate to frame. So timelines are wrong, but timelines are wrong because of a false emergency. The emergency, so long as there's somebody in office, there's no emergency at all, in my view. And I think what you should do is, so that the term of the incumbent does not extend, you begin the election earlier. That question I've already answered. The question of technology. The technological question really is one of technology governance. I can say this because I was involved in the electoral reforms in 2016 as one of the advisors, actually one of the team leaders of the two teams that were in Windsor. And I kept saying, the problem is governance. The problem is not the technology. And some of the things I said then came back to haunt us, because I said, what you need to worry is about what are the things that are proactively disclosable, even from the beginning, before you decide what technology, how to buy it, all those questions. If the governance of it from the beginning is what really is creating the problems that Jim is pointing to. Yes, the Kanjiro, the point you make about Singapore is taken in the spirit in which it is made. We have a problem in Africa, not just in Kenya, about institutional inflation. When one institution fails, we create another one. But this is not just about institutional failure. It's also about our attitude with confronting failure. When government services fail, we go to private solutions if we can afford it. So we find people repairing their own roads in their estates, taking their kids to private schools, buying insurance, so that they rescue the public system. They rescue the public system from the activism that is required to make it function properly. So the same thing, when the police fail, we create EACC. If EACC fails, we'll create something else. Trust you me. And we also say, it's payment. Payment is a problem. So EACC, you create it, they get higher salaries than the police. Then the police get demotivated and they stop doing their work. Ndio wanapata pesa kubwa, wacha wafanye kazi. So even what the problems the police was dealing with before are no longer dealt with. And because the EACC doesn't have the capacity to cover the whole country, it becomes also more ineffective than the police. So in fact, by creating these institutions, we remove the system that would have created a minimal protection, creates even bigger problem. It is what we say, the consequences of policy. If we don't think about the consequences of policy, sometimes you aggravate the initial problem. And you see this all the time in Zanzibar, where I was doing some work for the government. There was a place where people used to be run over by vehicles very frequently. So they put rubber strips. The notion being that rubber strips will slow down the cars, and then fewer people will die. The matatu drivers reasoned that if you go very fast, you don't feel the rubber strip, which is what they did. So deaths actually increased. And in some ways, that's what we are going through. We are building rubber strips. We are building rubber strips all over the place, thinking that the rubber strips will solve the failure. And then the other question that was asked by Kenjiro, or informally, was the question of thought leadership and why the kind of analysis that Jim and I are doing here is not being done by universities. I think you've got to understand the political economy of knowledge generation in this part of the world. There has been constant defunding of the universities. So if you want to make a career as a teacher, you have to also have a side hustle as a consultant. Otherwise, the money you're earning as a teacher, you cannot live on. And if you're having a consultant, the largest consultancy market is government. If you make the government antagonistic, your consultancy business suffers. So you've got this self-reinforcing problem. You cannot criticize the government. So that leadership disappears from there. And then we have also de-emphasized liberal education. We are telling people everyone should become a mechanic, everyone should do engineering, should do science, and we forget that in most civilized countries where people are serious, the first thing you do is give people a liberal education. Then after you give them a liberal education, train them in the sciences. A liberal education should be the foundation of society. It should not be something that you do and you say, oh, it's a choice between engineering and literature. It's a choice between engineering and anthropology. Shouldn't be. That's a false choice. Finally, I think there is a question from Tom Wolf that some of the comments you made, I can't respond to them about opinion polling and stuff. But this particular one, who was supposed to have to be responsible for those illegalities that the court identified in 2017. Generally, who is supposed to be responsible? The theory is that if a court finds some wrongdoing in the process of determining an issue, it makes recommendations about actions to be taken by other people. In fact, no action ever gets taken. So it's now become a case of reinforcing impunity by doing by just making recommendations to be seen to take action, but basically not doing anything. Register of voters and Parliament. Parliament is a very blunt space in which to take the register of voters for action. I mean, the sweetheart deal that was done to pension off the IEBC commissioners who had done Chicken Gate and also done corruption in 2013 was made by Parliament, members of Parliament. They didn't even want us, their advisors, to know the content of that deal. So that's not likely to be a space in which these sort of issues can be dealt with effectively. Thank you. Jim?
Yeah, I think in a way, Wachira has put it in a very sort of plain language where we thought that technology was the panacea to the political election issue that we had, and so we adopted technology, and that is equivalent to what Wachira was saying. We put the rubble, and then you realize that actually you're not actually resolving the issue. More people are dying. It's the same thing when we took when technology was embedded within the Kenyan electoral process. Once you have technology, it does not mean that you'll have credible elections. Because what technology does not exist in isolation. Technology, what it simply does is takes your processes and automates those particular processes. And once you've automated those particular processes, there's no easier way to manipulate something than using the technology. So we see that technology, yes, was fronted as a panacea, but now it has come to be a problem and a frontier for the new election fraud. So what is the issue? The issue is what Wachira has already touched on, which is the governance around that. The problem that we have is procurement, for example, of technology is not only technical, but it's also very political. And there's a lot of political interference. And the technology, what it does is you put the garbage in, the garbage gets out. It gives you what you put in. So how do you put it in? We have controls that are supposed to put in check what you're putting what you're putting in and what you are going to get as an output. So what in a nutshell I think has already been said is about the governance, is about the goodwill by those who are charged with the duty of implementing that technology to make sure that it's done transparently, it's done with integrity. But I don't know whether we'd ever get to that. But yes, technology can be a panacea, but as long as we want to use it to circumvent the elections, then that's what it will give us. What you put in is what you get into the technology. So yes, I agree. So it's a new frontier for electoral fraud. We are working, one of the things that we are going to work on is look at the proposals on how we can make it better or make it work to get those credible elections. I think there's a work in that particular direction that we'll be doing. The second one that I'm going to talk about is something Tom mentioned about the agents not coming up to say that those forms 34As were wrong or anything. This is what I'll tell you as an expert because we've looked at a couple of those form 34As. The first thing that you'll find is that they don't have what we call digital signatures. The digital signatures are invalid. So we cannot ascertain whether they were sent by the agents. And the reason why we cannot there's something in IT called non-repudiation. So if I send you an email, I can't come and deny that I'm the one who sent you an email. So that needs to be built into the kit so that when we throw or when we send those PDFs, at the National Tallying Center, the agent cannot deny that they're the ones who sent them. Now, yeah. Yeah. So, and then there was the issue about the JPEG or whatever. So, was it a JPEG or a PDF? Now, from my an expert opinion, the kits run on what you call the Android OS. The default scanner that is built within the Android scans in JPEG. That is one. That is the default. The second thing, we looked at the procurement, the RFP for the procurement of the BVR. And the procurement for the BVR, the specification was very clear that it should scan in JPEG. So the question I'm asking then, if it is scanning then in PDF, at some point, somebody must have gone and changed the specification in the RFP, which we couldn't get any documentation to say that, you know what, we are procuring the BVR kits, but you want it to be able to scan in PDF. What was put forward by the IBC to the vendors who were supposed to show interest was JPEG, clearly JPEG in the RFP. Then the other thing that I want you to take note of, go to the IBC portal. Check a couple of those PDFs. Some of them will be in colored, some of them will be in black and white. I can guarantee you that anything that is in colored has sort of been tampered with. The BVR kit should be able to do a JPEG in a monochrome form. Anything that is not monochrome, I would be suspicious about it. And some of them were too clear to have been done by the by the yeah. So that is that with regard to those PDF and agents or whatever. So I don't want to say much, but just from the context I've given you, you can draw your own conclusions. The audit, the register of voters. It's a hotly contested one in all the years, from 2013, 2017, and now 2022. What is my honest opinion? Why can't, because this is something that is holding information about the voters, why can't the political parties be given an electronic copy of the register to use their own experts to also do verification? Because at the moment, we've tried to get, for example, the electronic copy of the register, and that has not been forthcoming. That has not been forthcoming. We already can print the registers, and actually the law requires that we print the registers and put them at the polling stations. So I don't see why I'm asking you for the same information but in a different form, and now that becomes a problem. So I don't know, but that is for the lawyers and whatever, the advocacy, whether this could be, because if, for example, we personally had the register which was given to the political parties, then we can carry out the analysis and also present our results, which will be in parallel with the body that was given the tender to do the audit report, which is the KPMG. That report, we've not seen it up to date. And then just lastly, who else? There's another question which I'm just forgetting. Yeah. Winnie said something about access. I think that's probably what I'm... Yeah, with regard to the access. With this access during the petition, how we can get the access during the petition. Yeah. Now, IBC is mandated to build a system that is highly available. So as part of their design, that the availability element should be factored when they're building the systems. In other words, there should be redundancy that Washira was talking about. In all the places I've worked, I'm a solutions architect, so the design is something that I do. you would always have a redundant, for example, database that would be probably in something what we call a read-only format. Yeah. So, and we did suggest this during the scrutiny. We told them, but why don't you then give us access to the redundant server, and then we can do the scrutiny in that particular server. And that was not forthcoming. That's why we ended up with a demo. So my thing is they know what they should be doing. What we should be doing is have a segregation of duties, create roles for example, those who want to do the scrutiny. Within those roles, provide privileges that are not invasive and cannot allow them, for example, to tamper with the system. And these are proposals that we did give them during the scrutiny. Why don't you create for us a role? Give us, a role is just a collection of privileges, what you can do in the system. So you can create a role that just, we can read all the logs, but we cannot delete them. And so from that particular point of view, you are safe in that we can get in, we still can have access. The only things, we can only limit what can be done. So segregation of duties, creation of the roles that would allow us to do things based on the best practice of what we call the least privilege.